My little sister would always give me something handmade, usually crooked, usually glitter-covered, but always full of love. That was before everything changed between us, before she grew into the kind of person who expected the world to bend around her without ever asking how it might hurt someone else. My sister, Carla, had always been the golden child. She was younger than me by 4 years, and from the moment she was born, it was obvious that my parents saw her differently. She was charming, confident, and loud in a way that made people laugh even when she was being selfish. I was quieter, more responsible, the type who followed rules and tried not to cause problems. When we were kids, that meant I got praised for being mature, which sounded nice at the time, but really just meant I was expected to sacrifice more. If Carla forgot her homework, I helped her finish it. If she got into trouble at school, I was the one asked to talk her through her feelings. And when she became a mother in her early 20s, I somehow became the default backup parent. By the time I turned 32, Carla had 2 young children, a 3-year-old boy named Jamie and a baby girl named Lily. They were sweet kids, but they were exhausting. Carla loved them in her own way, but she loved her freedom too. She dropped them off at my apartment with barely any notice, saying she desperately needed a break, and my parents always backed her up. "She's overwhelmed," my mom would say. "You're so good with them," my dad would add, as if that automatically made it my responsibility. For years, I told myself it was temporary, that eventually Carla would grow up, learn to manage her life, and stop leaning on me so heavily. But it never happened. If anything, it got worse. The more I helped, the more everyone expected it. Saying no wasn't just difficult, it felt impossible. Because every time I tried, my parents would look at me with quiet disappointment, like I was failing some invisible test of being a good daughter. So when my parents told me they wanted to take me on a trip to Hawaii for my birthday, I was stunned, completely stunned. We weren't a family that did extravagant vacations. Most of our trips growing up were weekend drives to nearby towns, staying in modest motels and eating packed sandwiches. Hawaii felt unreal, like something out of a postcard. When my mom first mentioned it, I actually laughed because I thought she was joking. But she wasn't. "We've been saving," she said, smiling in a way that looked almost proud of herself. "You work so hard. We wanted to do something special for you this year." I remember the warmth that spread through my chest when she said that. For once, it felt like they saw me, not just as the responsible one, not just as the helper, but as someone who deserved something joyful and meaningful. I asked almost hesitantly, "Just us?" "Well," she said, glancing briefly at my dad, "Carla and the kids will come too, but it's still your birthday trip." I should have known then, that small hesitation, that quick glance between them. It was a warning sign disguised as a detail. Still, I wanted to believe them. I told myself it would be fine. Carla would be busy with her kids, sure, but we'd all still enjoy the beach, the sunsets, the dinners together. Maybe it would even bring us closer again, like when we were younger. The flight to Hawaii was long, but I remember feeling oddly peaceful. Looking out the airplane window at the endless ocean below, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: lightness. Like maybe this trip was the start of a new chapter, a chance to finally relax without being needed every second. That feeling lasted exactly 12 minutes after we landed. We were standing in the hotel lobby, surrounded by the scent of flowers and the distant sound of waves crashing somewhere beyond the walls. Carla was already tired and irritated, bouncing baby Lily on her hip while Jamie clung to her leg, whining about being hungry. My parents were excitedly talking to the receptionist, checking us in. I remember how beautiful everything looked: the polished floors, the huge windows filled with sunlight, the promise of the ocean just outside. Then Carla turned to me, exhaled dramatically, and without real warning, she pressed Lily into my arms. "Here," she said, already pulling Jamie away from her leg. "I need a break. You've got them, right?" I blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer directly. She just stretched her arms like she'd finished a long workout and said, "Mom told you, didn't she? You're helping with the kids this week. It's only fair." The words hit me like cold water. I looked toward my parents, expecting them to correct her, to laugh and say she was exaggerating. Instead, my mom gave me a gentle, almost pleading smile. "It would mean so much to your sister. You're so patient with them, and she really needs this vacation." I stood there holding a baby who was starting to fuss while Jamie tugged at my sleeve asking for snacks. My birthday trip suddenly didn't feel like it belonged to me anymore. And in that moment, something inside me sank, heavy and quiet, like a stone dropped into deep water. I realized this wasn't a gift. It was an expectation wrapped in pretty paper, and I hadn't even opened it yet. The first night in Hawaii, I barely saw the ocean. I had imagined stepping onto the beach at sunset, feeling the warm sand under my feet, maybe letting the waves wash over my ankles while the sky turned shades of orange and pink. Instead, I spent that evening in our hotel room, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, trying to coax Jamie into eating microwaved mac and cheese while Lily cried endlessly from teething pain. Carla had disappeared within an hour of arriving. She said she needed to unwind after the flight, which apparently meant dressing up, putting on makeup, and leaving with my parents to explore restaurants along the shore. Before she left, she leaned casually against the doorframe, smiling like she was handing off a purse instead of two small human beings. "You're the best, seriously," she said. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The words sounded like gratitude, but they felt like chains. I remember forcing a small smile back at her because that's what I'd always done. That was my role, being the reliable one, the understanding one, the one who didn't make things difficult. But inside, something twisted painfully because I realized she wasn't asking me for help. She was assuming it, and worse, so were my parents. By the time they returned later that night, laughing and smelling faintly of alcohol and sunscreen, both kids were finally asleep. I had dark circles under my eyes, my back ached from rocking Lily for hours, and my birthday, just 2 days away, felt like it was already slipping out of my hands. My mom peeked into the room, saw the sleeping kids, and smiled approvingly. "You're a natural," she whispered. "We knew we could count on you." I wanted to say something then. I wanted to tell her this wasn't what I'd expected, that I felt blindsided and hurt. But the words stayed trapped behind my teeth, because my whole life I'd been conditioned to swallow my discomfort if it meant keeping the peace. So I just nodded. And that became the pattern of the trip. Every morning I woke up before sunrise because Jamie would burst into the room demanding cartoons or breakfast. Carla slept in. My parents went down to the buffet early, sipping coffee and talking about snorkeling excursions or boat tours. And I stayed behind, cutting fruit into tiny pieces, wiping spilled juice off tables, and carrying Lily on my hip until my arm went numb. They never asked if I wanted to join them. They just assumed I couldn't. "Maybe tomorrow," my dad would say casually while grabbing a bitch bag. "You know how the kids are." And each time I felt like I was shrinking a little more inside myself, like I wasn't a daughter or a sister on vacation. I was staff, an unpaid nanny in a paradise I wasn't allowed to enjoy. On the third day, I finally saw the ocean properly. Not because I was free to explore it, but because Jamie had a meltdown near the shore. He had wanted a blue shovel for his sandcastle, not the red one I'd handed him. His screams were loud enough to turn heads. I knelt beside him, trying to calm him down, while Lily fussed in her stroller, the hot sun beating down on my shoulders. Around me, I could hear laughter, the rhythmic crash of waves, music drifting from somewhere nearby. And then I spotted my parents and Carla further down the beach. They were sitting under a large umbrella, drinks in hand, laughing. Laughing. Carla wore a wide straw hat and sunglasses, looking relaxed and carefree, like someone who didn't have a responsibility in the world. My parents looked just as content, watching the ocean like they were in a commercial for retirement happiness. Not one of them was looking at me. I don't know why that hurt so much in that moment. Maybe because it felt like I had disappeared from their lives, except when they needed something from me. Like I wasn't part of the joy. They had quietly pushed me into the background, into the role of caretaker, without ever asking if I wanted it. Jamie's screams grew louder, and tears blurred my vision. I wasn't crying because of him. I was crying because I suddenly realized this trip, this gift, had never been about me at all. It was about giving Carla freedom and giving my parents peace of mind. At my expense. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone on the balcony outside our room. The warm Hawaiian breeze moved gently through the air, carrying the scent of salt water and distant flowers. The sky was deep black, scattered with stars, and the ocean glimmered faintly under moonlight. It should have been a perfect moment, but I felt hollow. For years, I had convinced myself that being needed meant being loved, that if I kept sacrificing my time, my energy, my comfort, eventually it would come back to me in appreciation or understanding. But sitting there in the dark, I realized something painful. They didn't see my sacrifices as gifts. They saw them as obligations. And once someone believes your kindness is an obligation, they stop thanking you for it. The thought hit me like a quiet but devastating truth, because it meant this wasn't a one-time situation. It was a pattern, a lifelong one, and if I didn't do something to break it, nothing would ever change. The next morning, my mom knocked on the door early, her voice cheerful. "Good news," she said. "We booked a sunset dinner cruise for your birthday tomorrow night. It's going to be beautiful." For a brief moment, my heart lifted. A dinner cruise on the ocean for my birthday. It sounded exactly like the kind of experience I'd dreamed about. But then she added casually, almost as an afterthought, "Of course, you'll stay back with the kids. They're too young for something like that." The words landed slowly, like falling stones. And just like that, whatever hope had flickered inside me went out. I stared at her, feeling something shift deep in my chest. Not sadness this time. Something harder, something sharper. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just hurt. I was angry. I didn't say anything to my mom right away. I just stood there in the doorway, her words echoing in my mind like something unreal. For a moment, I genuinely wondered if I had misheard her, if maybe she meant something else, something less cruel than what it sounded like. But her face was calm, casual, completely unaware that she had just told me I wouldn't be allowed to attend my own birthday dinner. Instead, she smiled warmly, like she had delivered good news. "They'll bring you back dessert," she added, almost brightly. "We'll celebrate with you when we get back." Dessert. As if that was an equal trade for watching the sun set over the ocean on the one night that was supposed to be mine. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. And for a few seconds, I didn't trust myself to speak because I was afraid of what might come out. So I nodded. The same automatic response I'd given my whole life. The same quiet surrender. But something inside me didn't settle this time. It stirred. All that day, I moved through the routine like a ghost. I fed the kids, changed diapers, wiped sticky fingers, and carried Lily until my arms trembled. I answered Jamie's endless questions about seashells and sand crabs. I smiled when he laughed because none of this was his fault. But underneath it all, there was a steady heat building inside me, a slow burn. And the more I thought about it, the clearer everything became. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. They had planned this. They had invited me on this trip knowing exactly what role I would play. They hadn't asked because they already assumed my answer. That realization hurt more than anything else. Not because I hated helping. I loved my niece and nephew deeply. But love should never feel like a trap. It should never come at the cost of your own dignity. And for the first time in my life, I realized that what they were doing wasn't just unfair. It was disrespectful. That evening, I watched from the balcony as my parents and Carla walked toward the beach together. They were laughing again, relaxed and carefree. Carla held her straw hat against the wind, her dress fluttering around her legs. She looked happy, free. And I stood there holding Lily, who was fussing against my shoulder, while Jamie played on the floor behind me. It hit me then in a way it never had before. Carla's freedom had always been built on my sacrifice, and my parents had allowed it, encouraged it, protected it, because it was easier than asking her to grow up. That thought landed heavily inside me, and for the first time I didn't push it away. I let myself sit with it, let myself feel the anger fully. Not explosive anger, not the kind that screams or throws things, but the quiet kind, the kind that changes you, the kind that finally says, enough. The next morning was my birthday. I woke up before sunrise, not because of the kids, but because I couldn't sleep anymore. The room was dim and quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioner. For a few seconds after opening my eyes, I forgot where I was. Then everything came rushing back. The trip, the babysitting, the dinner cruise I wouldn't be allowed to attend. A heavy sadness settled over me, but beneath it was something else now. Clarity. I got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake anyone, and stepped onto the balcony. The sky was just beginning to lighten, streaks of pale pink spreading across the horizon. And for the first time since arriving, I saw the ocean at peace. No crowds, no noise, just endless water stretching into the distance. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the salt air, feeling something steady and calm begin to replace the storm inside me. Because in that quiet moment, I realized something important. I had spent my entire life waiting for my family to recognize my worth, waiting for them to treat me fairly, waiting for them to stop taking advantage of my kindness. But they would never. Not because they were evil, not because they didn't love me in their own way, but because they had grown comfortable with the role I played. And people rarely change a system that benefits them, unless someone forces it to change. That realization was painful, but it was also strangely freeing, because for the first time I understood that I didn't need their permission to stop being their solution. I didn't need their approval to choose myself. I stayed out there on the balcony until the sun fully rose, warm light spilling across the water like liquid gold. And as I watched it climb into the sky, something settled firmly inside me. A decision, quiet, unshakable. For the first time in my life, I was going to say no. Not gently, not apologetically, but clearly. and they weren't going to like it. At all. I didn't make a dramatic announcement. There was no shouting, no storming into the room, no confrontation right away. That wasn't my style, and honestly, it wouldn't have worked anyway. My family had spent years learning how to dismiss emotional outbursts from me as temporary frustration. If I wanted this to matter, if I wanted them to truly hear me, it had to be different this time. It had to be calm, firm, unmovable. The morning passed in its usual way. Jamie woke up early and climbed into my bed asking if it was my birthday yet. I smiled and told him yes, it was. He gave me a cricket little grin and said, "Happy birthday, Auntie," before immediately asking if we could go to the pool later. Lily cried for her bottle, Carla slept in late like she always did, and my parents went downstairs for breakfast without even knocking on my door. No one brought a cake. No one surprised me with decorations. No one even said the words "Happy Birthday" until almost noon. And when they did, it was quick, casual, almost like an afterthought. My dad said it first while passing through the room. "Oh, happy birthday, kiddo," he said, patting my shoulder lightly, already halfway turned toward the door. My mom followed with a quick hug and a distracted smile. "We're so glad we could all be together for it." Together. I nearly laughed at the irony of that word because I had never felt more alone. Carla didn't even say it until hours later when she finally woke up and wandered into the room, stretching her arms above her head. "Happy birthday," she said lazily, like she was commenting on the weather. "Thanks again for watching the kids tonight. The cruise is supposed to be amazing." That was it. No pause, no question, no acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I might want to be part of my own birthday celebration. And that was the moment something inside me settled into absolute certainty. Not anger anymore, not hurt, just clarity. I looked at her calmly, and for the first time in my life, I didn't soften my voice. "I won't be babysitting tonight." The silence felt heavy and immediate. Carla blinked like she genuinely didn't understand the sentence she had just heard. "What?" she said, laughing lightly as if I had made a joke. I repeated evenly, "I won't be babysitting tonight." Her expression shifted slowly from confusion to disbelief, then to irritation. "What are you talking about? We already made plans." "I know, you made them without asking me." She crossed her arms, her tone sharpening. "It's not a big deal, it's just a few hours." "It is a big deal," I said quietly. "It's my birthday." The words hung between us, simple but heavy with everything I had swallowed for years. For a second, she didn't respond. Then she rolled her eyes in that familiar, dismissive way that had always made me feel small growing up. "Oh my God, you're seriously going to make this into a thing?" I felt something inside me tighten, but I didn't back down. "It already is a thing," I said calmly. "It has been the entire trip." Her jaw clenched. "You knew I needed help. Mom and Dad told you." "No, they told me this was a birthday vacation for me." That shut her up for a moment because it was true, and we both knew it. She looked away first, scoffing. "You're being dramatic." Maybe, once upon a time, that word would have silenced me. It had worked before. It had kept me quiet, compliant, easy to manage. But not anymore. "I'm being honest," I said. She let out an exasperated sigh and raised her voice slightly. "So what, you expect me to cancel everything? That's selfish." The word hit me like a slap. Selfish? For wanting to spend my own birthday as more than a babysitter? For wanting one night where I wasn't the one sacrificing? I took a slow breath, and then I said something I had never said to her before. "Yes, I expect you to take responsibility for your own children tonight." Her face went red almost instantly. "That's not fair," she snapped. "You know how hard it is for me." And you know how hard it's been for me, I replied quietly, for years. That stopped her cold, because we had never said that part out loud before, never acknowledged the imbalance that had existed between us for so long. Her eyes narrowed. So that's what this is about. You're keeping score now? No, I said gently. I'm setting a boundary. She stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language, because to her, I probably had. In our family, boundaries weren't something I was allowed to have. I was the helper, the fixer, the one who made everyone else's lives easier, not the one who complicated things by asking for fairness. Her voice dropped cold and sharp. You're really going to ruin this trip over one night? I held her gaze steadily. No, I said, I'm refusing to let you ruin my birthday. The words felt powerful, terrifying, but also incredibly freeing, because for the first time, I wasn't negotiating, I wasn't apologizing, I wasn't trying to soften the truth. I was simply stating it. And Carla didn't know how to handle that. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked genuinely stunned, like the ground beneath her had shifted, because in her mind, I had always been predictable, reliable, easy to manage through guilt, but not today. And she could feel it. Finally, she threw up her hands in frustration. Fine, she snapped. Go talk to Mom and Dad. Let's see what they have to say about this. I nodded calmly. Okay, I said, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of that conversation anymore. I found my parents in the hotel cafe near the lobby. They were sitting at a small round table by the window, sipping coffee and looking out toward the palm trees swaying gently in the breeze. From a distance, they looked peaceful, like any older couple enjoying a relaxing vacation together. For a brief moment, I hesitated, because a part of me still wanted to protect that image, still wanted to believe they didn't fully understand what they had done, that maybe if I explained it gently enough, they would suddenly see everything clearly and feel remorse. But another part of me, the stronger, steadier part that had finally awakened, knew the truth. They understood more than I had ever given them credit for. They just hadn't cared enough to change it. I walked toward the table slowly. My heart was pounding, but my steps felt steady. When my mom noticed me, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, reaching for my hand. "We were just talking about tonight. The cruise is supposed to have live music and a beautiful sunset. It's going to be—" "I'm not babysitting tonight." I said it calmly, without raising my voice, but the words landed like a sudden crack in the air. Both of them froze. My dad's coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. My mom's smile faltered and slowly faded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then my mom's expression shifted into something cautious, almost pleading. "What do you mean?" she asked gently. "I mean," I said, keeping my voice even, "I won't be staying behind with the kids. Not tonight, not anymore." The silence that followed was heavy. I could see confusion in their faces, but underneath it there was something else too, something closer to discomfort. Because they knew this conversation had been coming, even if they hadn't expected me to actually have it. My dad cleared his throat. "Honey," he said carefully, "we thought you understood the arrangement." "There was no arrangement," I replied quietly. "There was an assumption." That made him shift uncomfortably in his chair. My mom reached for my hand again, her tone soft and coaxing. "Your sister's overwhelmed. You know how hard things have been for her." And there it was. The same explanation, the same justification I had heard my entire life. I gently pulled my hand back. I know she struggles, but I struggle too, and no one ever seems to consider that." My mom's eyes widened slightly, like the idea had never fully occurred to her before. "That's not true," she said quickly. "We appreciate everything you do." I nodded slowly. "I know you say that, but appreciation without change doesn't mean anything." The words seemed to hit her harder than I expected. Her mouth opened, then closed again, as if she didn't know how to respond. My dad sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair. "This isn't the time to start a conflict. We're on vacation. We just want everyone to enjoy themselves." I felt a sharp, bitter irony at that. "Exactly," I said softly. "I want to enjoy myself, too." Neither of them had an answer for that, because for the first time, I wasn't arguing. I wasn't accusing. I was simply stating a truth they had ignored for years. My mom's voice trembled slightly when she spoke again. "We never meant to hurt you," she whispered. And for the first time, I believed her. Not because their actions hadn't been hurtful, but because they had never stopped to truly examine them. They had simply followed the path of least resistance, and that path had always led through me. "I know you didn't mean to, but it still hurt." A long silence settled between us, heavy, unavoidable. And in that quiet, something shifted, not dramatically, not instantly, but enough. Because for the first time, they weren't dismissing my feelings. They were sitting with them, really hearing them. Finally, my dad spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "So you're serious?" he said. "Yes," I replied. He nodded slowly, looking older somehow in that moment. "Then we'll figure something out," he said. The words were simple, but they felt like a door opening, a small one, but real. And as I stood there watching my parents begin to grapple with a reality they had avoided for decades, I realized something important. Setting boundaries doesn't destroy relationships. It reveals which ones are strong enough to survive honesty, and which ones were built only on silence. For the rest of that afternoon, the air in our hotel suite felt different. Not tense in the explosive way I had always feared confrontation would bring, but quiet, heavy, like the calm after a long storm when everything is still settling into a new shape. Carla didn't speak to me at all. She moved around the room with stiff, clipped motions, packing a beach bag, checking her phone, adjusting Lily's blanket and the stroller without looking at me once. The silence between us wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, a punishment. I recognized it instantly because she had used it before. Growing up, whenever I disagreed with her or refused to help her with something, she would shut me out like this, cold, dismissive, making me feel like I had done something unforgivable. And almost every time, I had eventually caved. I would apologize just to end the discomfort, just to restore peace. But this time, I didn't. I stayed calm. I focused on Jamie as he showed me the little plastic turtle he had found near the pool. I fed Lily her afternoon bottle. I went about my tasks with the same quiet care I always had. But inside, something had shifted permanently. The guilt wasn't there anymore, only clarity. Around late afternoon, my parents returned from talking privately with Carla in the hallway. I hadn't heard the conversation, but I could tell it had been intense. My mom's eyes were red, like she had cried. My dad looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. Carla came in last. Her face was flushed with anger, and for the first time since we were kids, she looked uncertain. She stood in the middle of the room, arms folded tightly across her chest, and stared at me. "You really did this," she said flatly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried sharp disbelief. I met her gaze calmly. "I told you I would." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Mom and Dad say I have to take the kids tonight." I didn't respond because there was nothing to say. This wasn't something I had done to her. It was simply a situation she had never been forced to face before. Responsibility. Her jaw tightened. "Do you have any idea how hard this is going to be?" I held her gaze gently but firmly. "Yes," I said, "I do." That answer hit her harder than any argument could have, because it reminded her, whether she wanted to admit it or not, that I had been carrying that exact burden for years. She looked away first, her eyes glistening with something I couldn't quite identify. Anger, frustration, maybe even a flicker of shame. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she spoke again, her voice lower. "You could have just helped one more night. It's your birthday, not some life-changing event." The words stung, but not in the way they used to, because now I could see them for what they were. Not truth, just defensiveness. "I've helped for years," I said quietly. "This is just the first time I've said no." The room fell silent, and in that silence, something unspoken finally hung in the air between us. A truth neither of us had ever acknowledged before, that our relationship had never been equal, that love had been tangled with expectation, that my kindness had slowly turned into something she relied on so completely she had stopped seeing it as kindness at all. She turned away without another word and began gathering the kids' things with quick, frustrated movements. For a moment, watching her struggle with the diaper bag, the snacks, the stroller, I felt a familiar tug of instinct, the urge to step in, to make things easier, to smooth everything over. But I stayed where I was, because helping out of love is healthy, helping out of guilt is not. And for the first time in my life, I knew the difference. That evening, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, I got ready slowly. I chose a simple blue dress I had packed for the trip, one I had originally imagined wearing to the dinner cruise. I brushed my hair carefully, applied light makeup, and looked myself in the mirror. For the first time since arriving in Hawaii, I looked like someone on vacation. Not a caretaker, not an afterthought, just myself. When I stepped out of the bathroom, my mom looked at me and her eyes softened. "You look beautiful," she said quietly. The warmth in her voice felt genuine, different. And I realized this was the first time on the entire trip that she had really seen me, not as someone helping, but as someone simply existing. "Thank you," I said. She hesitated for a moment, then added softly, "We're proud of you, you know." The words surprised me, not because I had never heard them before, but because this time they didn't feel tied to what I could do for others. They felt tied to who I was, and that made all the difference. Carla left shortly after, pushing the stroller while Jamie walked beside her, holding her hand. She didn't look back at me as she exited the room, but just before the door closed, I heard her sigh, a long, heavy sound. Not of anger, but of someone facing something they had avoided for a long time. And as the door clicked shut, I felt something inside me release, a quiet weight I hadn't realized I had been carrying my entire life, because for the first time, I had chosen myself, and the world hadn't fallen apart. That night, for the first time since arriving in Hawaii, I walked down to the beach alone. The sky was painted in deep oranges and soft pinks, the sun hovering just above the horizon like it was reluctant to leave. The air was warm and gentle, carrying the steady rhythm of the waves rolling onto the shore. I slipped off my sandals and stepped onto the sand. It was soft, almost cool beneath my feet, and as I walked closer to the water, I felt something inside me begin to loosen, a tension I hadn't even realized had settled into my body over the years. For so long, I had lived in a constant state of quiet readiness, ready to help, ready to fix, ready to step in whenever someone else needed something. But standing there, watching the ocean stretch endlessly in front of me, I realized something simple and powerful. No one needed me right now, and that was okay. It didn't mean I was unloved. It didn't mean I was unimportant. It simply meant I was free. I walked along the shoreline slowly, letting the waves brush against my ankles. The water was warm, and each time it receded, it pulled the sand slightly from beneath my feet, making me feel like I was gently sinking and steadying at the same time. It felt strangely symbolic, like everything I had believed about my place in my family was shifting beneath me, and instead of falling, I was finding balance. As the sun dipped lower, I found a quiet spot away from the crowds and sat down. Around me, people laughed, couples took photos, children ran through the surf. Life was happening everywhere, and for once, I wasn't watching it from the sidelines. I was part of it. A deep breath left my chest, and with it came a wave of emotion I hadn't allowed myself to fully feel yet. Sadness. Not for what had happened on this trip, but for the years before it. For all the times I had said yes when I wanted to say no. For all the birthdays, holidays, and quiet moments of my life that I had given away piece by piece because I believed that was what love required. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. But they didn't feel heavy. They felt cleansing, because along with the sadness came something else, relief. The relief of finally understanding that love doesn't mean erasing yourself, that being a good daughter or sister doesn't mean carrying everyone else at the expense of your own happiness, that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're clarity. I stayed there until the sun disappeared completely and the sky turned deep blue. One by one, stars began to appear above the ocean. And as I sat in that quiet, something inside me settled into a peaceful certainty. I wasn't losing my family. I was simply changing how I existed within it. Later that night, when I returned to the hotel room, it was quiet. My parents were sitting on the balcony together, speaking in low voices. They looked up when I walked in, and my mom smiled softly. "How was your evening?" she asked. "It was peaceful," I replied. My dad nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You deserved that." The words were simple, but they held weight because they acknowledged something they had never fully acknowledged before, that I deserved things too. Not just responsibilities, not just expectations, but joy, rest, space. We sat together for a while, talking quietly about the ocean, about the beauty of the sunset, about small, simple things that had nothing to do with obligations or conflicts. And for the first time in years, our conversation felt equal. Like I wasn't there to support them, but to simply be with them. Carla didn't return until late. When she did, she looked exhausted. Her hair was messy, Lily was sleeping against her shoulder, and Jamie clung sleepily to her leg. She moved into the room quietly, clearly surprised to see me still awake. For a moment, we just looked at each other. There was no anger in her eyes now, only fatigue and something else, understanding. She gently laid Lily in the crib, helped Jamie into bed, and then sat down on the edge of the couch with a long, heavy exhale. "That was hard," she said quietly. I didn't respond right away. I simply nodded, because she didn't need comfort in that moment. She needed honesty. After a pause, she spoke again. "I didn't realize how much you've been doing," she admitted. Her voice wasn't defensive anymore. It was subdued, almost vulnerable. And for the first time in our adult lives, she sounded like someone who was seeing the truth clearly. I walked over and sat across from her. "I never asked you to realize," I said gently. "I just kept doing it." She rubbed her hands together, staring at the floor. "I got used to it," she whispered. "I got used to you always being there to catch everything." Her words were painful, but they were also honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, creates space for something new. She looked up at me slowly. "I'm sorry," she said. It was a small sentence, but it carried years of unspoken imbalance. I felt a lump rise in my throat, not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because this was the first real step towards something healthier between us. "I love the kids," I said softly. "I'll always help when I can, but I can't be your backup parent anymore." She nodded, and this time she didn't argue, because now she understood. The next morning felt different in a way that was subtle but unmistakable. For the first time since we arrived in Hawaii, I didn't wake up to Jamie tugging at my arm or Lily crying in the early hours. Instead, I woke naturally to soft sunlight filtering through the curtains and the distant sound of waves rolling onto the shore. For a few seconds, I just lay there, letting the quiet settle over me. It felt unfamiliar, but peaceful. When I finally stepped out of the bedroom, I found Carla already awake in the small living area. She was sitting on the floor beside Lily, who was playing with a brightly colored toy ring, while Jamie flipped through a picture book nearby. Carla looked tired. There were faint dark circles under her eyes, but she also looked present, fully engaged, not rushed or distracted the way she often was when she knew someone else would eventually step in. She glanced up when she saw me. "Morning," she said quietly. Her tone was softer than it had been in years. "Morning," I replied. For a moment, neither of us said anything else. The silence wasn't awkward, though. It felt more like unfamiliar territory we were both carefully stepping through. Then she spoke again. "They woke up at 6, she said, giving a small, tired smile. Jamie wanted pancakes and Lily refused her first bottle. I smiled slightly. "Sounds about right." She nodded, letting out a small sigh. I didn't realize how much work it actually is to handle them both alone. Her eyes met mine briefly, and in that glance was a quiet acknowledgement of everything she had never fully understood before, not as an abstract idea, but as a lived reality. "I know," I said gently. She hesitated, then added, "I should have known. I should have paid more attention all these years." The words weren't dramatic or emotional. They were simple, but they carried weight. Because they weren't defensive, they were reflective. And that was new. I walked into the kitchen area and poured myself a glass of water. For the first time on this trip, I didn't feel the automatic pull to step in, to take over, to ask what needed to be done, because nothing did. Carla was handling it, and she wasn't falling apart. She was tired, but capable. And watching her in that moment, I realized something important. Sometimes people don't change because they don't care. They fail to change because they've never been required to. As long as someone else keeps catching them, they never learn to stand on their own. Later that morning, my parents returned from an early walk along the beach. My mom carried a small paper bag, and when she saw me, her face lit up with a genuine warm smile. "We brought you something," she said. She handed me the bag, and inside was a small pineapple-shaped pastry dusted with powdered sugar. I blinked in surprise. "For your birthday," she said softly, "we wanted to do something just for you." It wasn't extravagant, it wasn't a grand gesture, but it was thoughtful, personal, and most importantly, it was about me, not about what I could do for anyone else. "Thank you," I said quietly. My dad placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. I looked at him, waiting. He continued, his voice slower than usual. "We got comfortable relying on you, too comfortable, and we didn't realize how unfair that was until you finally spoke up." My mom nodded, her eyes glistening slightly. "You've always been so strong," she added. "We thought you didn't need as much support as your sister, but that was wrong." Hearing those words stirred something deep inside me, not resentment, not anger, but a quiet, long-awaited validation, because for years I hadn't wanted them to fix everything. I had just wanted them to see it, to recognize it. And now, they did. "I don't want to stop being part of this family," I said gently. "I just needed to feel balanced." My dad immediately nodded. "It will," he said firmly. "We promise." The sincerity in his voice felt real, not defensive, not dismissive, just honest. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed him. The rest of that day unfolded in a way that felt entirely new. Carla took the kids to the pool herself. My parents asked if I wanted to join them for a walk along the beach, not as someone needed for anything, but simply as their daughter. And for the first time on the entire trip, I experienced Hawaii the way I had imagined before we arrived. The warmth of the sun on my skin, the sound of waves stretching endlessly across the horizon, the simple, peaceful joy of existing without carrying anyone else's weight. As I walked along the shore with my parents that afternoon, my mom slipped her arm gently through mine. "You know," she said quietly, "this trip didn't go the way we expected." I smiled softly. "No," I agreed. She squeezed my arm gently. "But maybe it went the way it needed to." And as I looked out at the vast blue ocean, I realized she was right. Because sometimes the most meaningful journeys aren't the ones that give you perfect memories. They're the ones that force you to finally see the truth and change your life because of it. The final days of the trip passed in a way that felt almost surreal compared to how it had begun. There were no dramatic apologies, no tearful group hugs, no sudden transformation into a perfect family dynamic. Real life doesn't work that way. But there was something far more meaningful than that. There was effort, quiet, consistent effort. Carla woke up with her children each morning without expecting anyone to step in. She packed their snacks, carried Lily when she cried, and patiently answered Jamie's endless questions about everything he saw. Sometimes she looked overwhelmed, but she never turned to me with that automatic assumption that I would take over. Instead, she asked, and sometimes I said yes, but sometimes I said no, and she respected it. That change alone felt like an entirely new world. One afternoon, while we were sitting near the hotel pool watching Jamie splash happily in the shallow end, Carla turned to me and spoke in a low, thoughtful voice. "I used to think you just liked being the responsible one," she admitted, "like it was part of who you were." I looked at her calmly. "It is part of who I am," I said, "but it shouldn't have been all of who I was." She nodded slowly, staring at the water. "I see that now," she murmured. There was a pause before she added quietly, "I never meant to take advantage of you." I believed her. Not because her actions hadn't hurt me, but because intention and impact aren't always the same thing. "I know," I said gently, "but it still happened." She swallowed hard and nodded again. I'm going to try to do better. It wasn't a dramatic promise. It wasn't loud or emotional, but it was sincere, and that mattered more than anything else. Later that evening, my parents invited all of us to dinner at a small beachfront restaurant. The tables were set directly on the sand, lit by soft lanterns that swayed gently in the ocean breeze. This time, there was no question about who would watch the kids. Carla sat between Jamie and Lily, cutting food into small pieces and wiping sticky hands with quiet patience. My mom helped her occasionally, but no one looked at me with expectation. For the first time, I was simply another person at the table. Not the backup plan, not the solution, just family. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in warm shades of gold and violet, my dad raised his glass and cleared his throat. "I want to say something," he said. We all looked at him. He wasn't a man who spoke emotionally very often, but tonight his voice was steady and sincere. "This trip started with a mistake, a big one. We thought we were giving you something special," he added, looking directly at me. "But instead, we gave you more responsibility." He paused before continuing. "You've spent your whole life being there for all of us, and we took that for granted. That wasn't fair, and we're sorry." The sincerity in his words made my chest tighten unexpectedly, because this wasn't a casual apology. It was acknowledgement. My mom reached across the table and gently took my hand. "You deserve to feel celebrated, not just needed." Tears stung my eyes, but they didn't fall, because for the first time in a long time, I felt something deeper than hurt. I felt seen, and that healed something inside me that I hadn't realized was still wounded. Carla looked at me next, her voice quieter than usual. "I don't want to keep repeating the same patterns. I want us to have a real relationship, not one where you're always the one carrying everything." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Because change doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with awareness, with the willingness to admit something has been wrong, and with the choice to do differently moving forward. As the sun disappeared completely beneath the horizon, casting a soft glow across the water, I realized something profound. For years, I had believed that setting boundaries would destroy my family relationships, that speaking up would create distance, that choosing myself would mean losing them. But the opposite had happened. By finally being honest, I had given them the chance to truly see me. And in doing those, I had made space for a healthier, more balanced love. Not perfect, but real. And that was something far more meaningful than any perfect vacation memory. Because this trip, despite all the pain at the beginning, had given me something I had never had before: a voice, and the courage to use it. The morning we were scheduled to fly home, I woke before anyone else. Not because of noise or stress or responsibility, but because something inside me felt quietly awake, like it didn't want to miss the final moments of this place that had unexpectedly changed my life. I stepped onto the balcony, the air warm and gentle against my skin. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of me, calm and steady under the soft glow of early sunlight. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing, thinking, because this trip had not been what I imagined when my parents first handed me that envelope months ago. It hadn't been carefree or relaxing or filled with picture-perfect birthday memories. But it had been something far more important. It had forced a truth into the open that had been buried beneath years of quiet sacrifice. And now, standing there watching the waves roll in and out, I could finally see my life with a clarity I had never had before. For so long, I had tied my worth to being useful, to being dependable, to being the person everyone could lean on without question. I had believed that was what made me lovable. But this trip taught me something deeper. Being loved should never require disappearing. Being kind should never mean being invisible. And being strong should never mean carrying everyone else at the expense of yourself. Those realizations didn't come with fireworks or dramatic moments. They came quietly, steadily, like the tide reshaping the shoreline over time. Behind me, I heard the sliding door open softly. My mom stepped out onto the balcony, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. I shook my head, smiling faintly. "Just wanted to watch the ocean one last time." She nodded and stood beside me in silence for a moment, her gaze following the horizon. After a pause, she spoke quietly. "You know, I keep thinking about something you said." I looked at her. She continued, her voice thoughtful. "That appreciation without change doesn't mean anything." Hearing my own words reflected back to me felt strange, but also meaningful. "I didn't understand that before," she admitted, "but I do now." I saw genuine regret in her eyes, and something else, determination. "We're going to do better. Not just say it, actually do it." I believed her, not because change would happen overnight, but because now the truth had been spoken, and once truth enters a family dynamic, it changes everything. We stood there quietly until the sun rose fully above the water. The sky turned bright blue, and the world around us slowly came alive with movement and sound. When we finally went back inside, Carla was already packing the kids' bags. Jamie sat on the floor playing with a small seashell he insisted on bringing home, while Lily babbled happily in her stroller. Carla looked up at me, and there was something steady in her D's now, something grounded. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I replied. She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days. About us." I waited, letting her continue at her own pace. "I don't want you to feel like you have to earn your place in this family anymore. You should just have it, because you're part of it." Her words were simple, but they struck deep, because for so many years that had been exactly how I had felt, that my place depended on how much I gave, how much I helped, how much I sacrificed. Hearing her acknowledge that truth, it felt like a weight lifting. "Thank you," I said softly. She nodded, then added with a small, tired smile, "And I'm going to figure out how to manage things better on my own, not because you won't help, but because it's my responsibility." There was no defensiveness in her tone, no resentment, just quiet acceptance, and that was all I had ever really needed. At the airport later that day, as we waited near our gate, I watched Jamie excitedly point at planes outside the window while Lily giggled in Carla's arms. My parents sat nearby, chatting about the trip and occasionally glancing at me with soft, thoughtful expressions. The atmosphere between us felt calmer than it had in years. Not perfect, not magically healed, but honest. And honesty creates a foundation that perfection never can. As boarding was announced, my dad stood up and placed a hand on my shoulder. You know, he said quietly, this birthday may not have gone the way we planned. I smiled slightly. No, I agreed. He squeezed my shoulder gently. But it may have been the most important one yet. I looked at him and realized he was right, because this birthday hadn't just marked another year of my life. It had marked the moment I stopped abandoning myself for the sake of peace, the moment I stopped confusing silence with love, the moment I chose to stand firmly in my own worth. And that was a gift no vacation could ever match. The flight home was quiet. Not the tense silence that had marked our earlier travels, but the kind of calm that comes after a storm passes, when everyone is slowly adjusting to a new normal. I watched the clouds pass by the window and realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what I owed anyone. I wasn't counting up favors, wondering if I'd done enough, worrying if someone would be disappointed. I was just existing, breathing, alive. Carla sat across the aisle with Lily in her lap and Jamie leaning against her. She smiled at me briefly, and I smiled back. There were no grand apologies, no dramatics, no excessive explanations, just acknowledgement. And in that, there was power. Because we didn't need perfection, we needed honesty. When we finally landed, the airport felt like a strange new world. The familiar chaos of luggage, announcements, and families reuniting didn't intimidate me. I felt steady, strong, grounded. My parents had each carried a small piece of the emotional weight during the trip, and for the first time I felt it shared evenly instead of entirely on my shoulders. Carla pushed the stroller through the terminal, and Jamie ran a few steps ahead, turning back every few seconds to make sure I was following. And in that moment, I realized something essential. My relationship with my sister, with my parents, with my family, it didn't need to be defined by sacrifice anymore. It could exist fully and fairly, with love and boundaries coexisting. On the drive home, the conversation was light. My parents asked about the sights we had seen, and Carla talked about the kids' antics at the pool. I listened, laughed when appropriate, but mostly observed. And for the first time, I didn't feel pressured to make everything perfect. I didn't have to anticipate every need or smooth over every difficulty. My presence alone was enough. That evening, after everyone settled back into their routine at home, I found a quiet moment in my room. I sat by the window, looking out at the familiar street, the quiet houses, and the subtle glow of streetlights reflecting off the asphalt. And I thought about the trip, about the frustration, the tears, the anger, and the eventual clarity I had gained. I realized something profound. Boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about defining where love ends and self-sacrifice begins. They are about teaching others how to value you, not out of obligation, but because they recognize your worth. When I reflected on the trip, I didn't think about the parts that had hurt me the most. I thought about the moments that had changed me, the moments I had spoken up, the moments I had refused to be used, the moments my family finally listened. Those moments would shape every relationship I had going forward. A few days later, Carla called me after putting the kids to bed. Her voice was quieter than usual, thoughtful. "I've been thinking about Hawaii," she said, "about how I treated you, and I want to do better. I don't want you to feel like you're always responsible for everything. I don't want to take that from you anymore." Her words weren't dramatic. There were no tears or raised voices, just honesty and responsibility, and that was more meaningful than anything else she could have said. "I appreciate that," I said softly. "I'm here to help, but I'm not your backup anymore. That's the difference." She was silent for a long moment, then whispered, "I understand. Thank you for showing me." It was strange, the power of that moment, not because I had won or forced change, but because I had finally shown up as myself, firm, clear, and unwilling to compromise my worth. And my family had responded. They had adapted. They had listened. And in doing so, they had grown too. In the weeks that followed, our family dynamic began to shift subtly but meaningfully. Carla started asking for help rather than assuming it. My parents began checking in with me about my needs, not just the kids. Our interactions carried more respect, more balance, and more mutual care. And me? I stopped waiting for approval. I stopped confusing responsibility with love. I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could give to others. Instead, I measured it by how honestly I could live, and by the courage I had to stand up for myself when it mattered most. Looking back on that Hawaii trip now, I see it for what it truly was. A turning point, not because of the sun, the ocean, or even the birthday celebration I almost missed, but because it forced me to confront a painful truth, speak it aloud, and claim my own space within a family I love. It wasn't easy. There were tears, frustration, and lingering resentment, but there was also growth, acknowledgement, and an understanding that love without boundaries isn't sustainable. It's just expectation disguised as care. I don't know if my parents or Carla will ever fully comprehend the depth of what I felt that week, and honestly, I don't need them to, because the lesson I carry is mine. It is the clarity I gained from saying no, from refusing to be invisible, from demanding respect without anger or guilt. And for me, that is enough. Some people may never understand why standing up for yourself can feel like a betrayal. Some will try to guilt you for asserting your needs. But I learned that true respect comes not from constant compliance. It comes from honesty, boundaries, and the courage to protect your own heart while still loving those around you. That birthday wasn't the celebration I had imagined, but it became something far more valuable. The moment I learned that my voice matters, my choices matter, and that I don't have to disappear to be loved. Because love that requires your disappearance isn't love at all. It's time to carry that truth forward, and I will. The ocean will always remind me of that week, the heat of the sun, the sound of the waves, the gentle weight of sand under my feet, not as a memory of disappointment, but as a symbol of clarity, strength, and the courage to finally say, I matter too. And that is a gift I will never forget.